Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. Happy New Year, since it's the first time I think we see each other, and we haven't quite finished January. I see all the important people here this morning, so this must be a hot topic, so thank you all for coming. Look, if I may say, this is a great report, and it tells us a lot of things. It tells us a lot of things that we think we knew, first of all, but it also tells us some new things. So a few comments on it. First of all, there has been a very obvious and quite pronounced increase in patenting activity in the field of AI since 2013. So 50% of all the patent applications filed in the field of artificial intelligence that we have been able to, my colleagues have been able to identify since the 1950s, have actually been filed since 2013. So this is one thing that we can see. That's a very dramatic change in the scenery. Now, patents are not a perfect indicator, as we all know, of underlying technological activity, but they're one of the best indicators that we have of what is going on, because people or enterprises do not spend money unless there is a purpose, and they're spending money here to protect their perceived competitive advantage in the field of AI. Now, what are some of the things that the data are showing? First of all, I think the data are showing us that the degree of penetration of AI across all, perhaps if I back up, I should say that one of the contributions of the report is to divide up the field of AI into something that we're able to deal with. And we've divided into three categories. First of all, the techniques that are used in artificial intelligence, right? Secondly, the functional applications of those techniques. And thirdly, the looking across commercial and industrial sectors to give us an idea. So now let me go back to where I was. One of the comments one can make is that the degree of penetration of AI in the commercial industrial sectors is very extensive. So if you look at our report and you look at the data, they're showing that AI is penetrating right across the commercial and industrial sector. And that's something that we probably thought we knew, but here is evidence that shows it. A second thing that is coming through in the data is that of the various techniques, the hot one that has been moving is machine learning. And again, that's something that we thought we knew, but here is some solid empirical evidence to show that machine learning has been the area that has been moving in particular. A third thing that we would say, and we've looked at here not just patent applications but also scientific publications, new scientific publications, is that the US and China obviously have stolen the lead. You know, they're out in front in this area in terms of numbers of applications and scientific publications. And when you look at scientific publications, it's quite interesting because it's a very nice case study of technology following science. So you have an upsurge in the scientific publications starting around about 2003, and then the upsurge in the technological applications starting around about 2013. So it's quite a nice little observation on how science influences technology. Then I would say that something that's quite interesting is that business is dominating the patent applications. So you see business much more than universities as the major patent filer in this area. And of course, you know, that goes back to science and technology, and if you look at scientific publications, it might be a somewhat different picture, but in terms of the applications of technology. Then I think let me make one final comment, because there's a huge amount in this report. One final comment, and that is that there is, of course, a great and developing debate out there as to whether the categories of the traditional intellectual property system, which really emerged with the Industrial Revolution, are applying or applying satisfactorily to the new technological basis, or the technological basis of the new economy. And what the data are telling us is that the traditional intellectual property system, with patents as one of the foremost elements, is not going out of fashion. On the contrary, you know, all the growth rates that we've seen in the last 10 years in particular of intellectual property applications rising at a rate that far exceeds the rate of growth in the world economy, and in particular in this area, in AI, extraordinary growth rates, you know, roughly, and I'm generalising here, you have to look at the specific details, 30% growth rates, roughly 30% growth rates. This is not telling us that the patent system is ill-adapted to the new technologies. It's telling us that industry is using the patent system to protect their investments in AI in a major, major way. Now, that said, I think we do have to step back and look at the whole picture of new technological activity and say, you know, okay, that's fine, but are there gaps? You know, are there new areas emerging that are not necessarily exactly covered by the traditional categories of intellectual property? And I think when you do that, bearing in mind that intellectual property, you know, the traditional categories and in particular patents are being used, you know, to a major extent, bearing all that in mind, I'd say the major question out there from a conceptual point of view is data in general. And when you unpack AI, well, it's data and algorithms. Much of the patenting activity is focusing on the algorithms and the applications, but data is, of course, the huge question that's out there with a multiplicity of dimensions that you're all, you know, very much aware of. And those dimensions, you know, they cover very different fields. They cover, for example, security of data and all of the questions around security of data that we're seeing. They cover the integrity of data, the fake news question and all the questions that are out there about the integrity of data. They cover the military applications of data and autonomous weapon systems and so on. That's another sort of dimension outside our area. They cover questions of competition law, that you have internet giants largely only in the United States of America and China, and not elsewhere. You have the Amazons, the Facebooks, the so on in the United States of America, and you have the Baidus and the Tencents and so on in China, and not internet giants in Europe, for example, or other parts of the world. So there are competition law questions that we see playing out a bit. And then you have property law questions. I mean, whose data are they? And this is a question that's out there, and that we will, at WIPO, start a conversation about this year with our member states. It's far too early, I think, for anyone to be jumping in and saying this should be the rule, that should be the rule. But we need to start to talk about this seriously as an international community also, because ultimately, data is highly mobile and it's not a national only question. And there are very interesting developments there. And of the various dimensions I mentioned, of course, personal data and privacy is another dimension that I didn't mention. So there we are. I mean, as I said, I don't do justice to the report, and my colleagues have done a great job here. It's a great piece of work that I think advances our understanding of what exactly is happening.
Super. Tom. Right. Christine and Catherine.
Tom Miles from Reuters. I have 3 questions, I'm afraid.
Sure.
But quite short, quite big questions. One is, can you differentiate US and China? Like, who's winning, who's losing, what are they doing differently? The second question is this good news or bad news? Third question is, when does this stuff hit the market or change our lives, or is it already?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, US and China, I don't think, this goes to the question really of quality, I think. The truth is, as I think we've discussed on, on previous occasions, we don't have a reliable quality metric for patent applications. If you did, you wouldn't need a venture capital industry. We'd all know what's going to move and what's not going to move. So we're left with numbers and the effect at some later period of those numbers in terms of commercial applications and the successful commercial applications. And the successful commercial applications are not on the basis of the strength of the technology only. I think we can't differentiate that, and we have to use a range. If you were going to make a comparison, I think you would have to use a range of indicators that go from the ones we've dealt with, which are scientific publications and patent applications, through to investment in research and development, through to the commercial applications that are being successful, through to the strategy being adopted by each country, which are very different strategies, of course, as you all know. You have, on the one hand, a strategy which is a centrally organised, leadership-led strategy. On the other hand, and I use this word in a value-free sense, chaotic market-based system. So they're totally different, and it's a very interesting competition, strategic competition to see play out. Now, is it good news or bad news? Well, I would tend to say that all technology is somewhat neutral, and it depends on what you do with it. So, insofar as you may use AI, science, and techniques for developing autonomous weapon systems that are going to kill us all, it's not very good news, But insofar as it's being used to improve health indicators, for diagnostics, for other purposes, it's great news. So it's like, I think, all technologies, it depends on the social use of it, and their policy becomes important, I think. And the final one, Tom?
Well, when does it sort of change our lives and play into?
I think it's happening.
Market?
I think it's happening. It's not always transparent, because what technology is used behind the scenes to achieve a particular result is not necessarily or always transparent. And indeed, some of the best technologies aim to hide the technology and make the user experience extremely simple. But it means that we do need to keep an eye on all of this.
Sorry, could I just ask you to say a bit more about the difference between China and the US? I realise they've got different models, but are they doing sort of different kinds of AI? Are they pushing in different direction? I mean,
I think it goes a little beyond what we are able to say from the applications, but do you have any comments, Alejandro or Elisa, on this? I mean, the techniques are fairly similar, actually.
Yes. In fact, for China...
Come to the microphone, please.
Sorry.
Alejandro Roca Campagna.
From WIPO. In fact, in China, the main patent applications, China is leading in deep learning, which is a AI technique, but is also leading us in the UA, because deep learning has become one of the major areas where techniques, where research and development is being is being done, but we can see China leading in deep learning. For example, Baidu, which is a Chinese firm, is the second in the top 20 regarding deep learning techniques, regarding AI techniques, and deep learning being a subcategory of machine learning.
Okay, I have on my list Christine, then Catherine, then Laurent, then Nick.
Christiana, German press agency. This data goes all the way to 2016, but with the exponential rise in applications, I guess that 2 years is a long time in patent history. Do you have any indication from data that you already have whether the development has gone the same direction? Has it exponentially increased, or is it kind of dying down?
Look, I can only give you an anecdotal response to that, which is I very much doubt it's dying down. You know, we obviously have to limit in order to analyse the data, and this report has been under preparation for about 9 to 12 months. So we go back a year in terms of this, and thus the cut-off point of 2016. We will obviously study this. But anecdotally, I would say that that's highly unlikely that there's any slowdown in this activity.
It's also the 18-month period.
That's a very good point. There is a very good point. You know, the patent data is not public until it's published, and it's published 18 months after the date of the application.
Catherine says.
I see that the leading companies are IBM and Microsoft.
Yeah.
I was wondering what about the others, like Alphabet, Google, Facebook, Amazon. They are users of AI. And I was wondering if you can only measure AI activity through patents, or other categories of IP would also be relevant in protecting AI for those companies?
Well, on the second one, you know, there are obviously applications, other applications of IP to the commercial expression of the technology. For example, you know, and it's not always the case with AI, but to the extent that AI is used in smartphones and other applications, design is going to be important. Branding is important. You know, IBM you mentioned, of course. Watson has been a very significant brand for IBM and for getting IBM's position out there as a leading player in AI. And your first one, Catherine?
It was like to Facebook, Amazon.
Yeah.
And sorry,
Yeah, we have a list.
I forgot to ask. There was some question about the patentability of something, of system that is evolving. Because some AI systems are meant to evolve.
It's a very good question. I mean, the general approach that's being adopted, and I'm speaking, one must speak in generalizations here, by IP officers is to treat AI applications like any other computer-assisted invention, you know. But you're right. To what extent can you protect an algorithm that's constantly changing? You know, it's a newer question, and that's something we obviously have to see how the experts are going to approach that.
Page 60.
Page 60.
The one on page 60, right?
Yeah. We'll give you the
We have it.
who is involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Laurent, ETS.
Laurent, Civil Swiss News Agency. Based on the figures of 2016, can you give us a sense of the share of AI-related patent applications compared to the total? And is it already the first source of it, or if not, when do you expect that to be the first source of it? And then, do you think do you think there might be a need to protect the physical embodiment of the DG of WIPO, or is it? When do you expect
That's not going to concern me. Yeah. 0.6% of all applications is the answer to your first one. But, you know, we do have a little bit of a classification problem there because the traditional classification systems were not obviously invented for AI. They're invented for a range of technologies going back to, you know, industrialization. So the categories are actually evolving of how you classify, and whether you classify according to technology or you classify according to business application. And there are two different classifications out there, standard industrial classification, and then the classifications that we use, which are more based on the technology. So this will all, you know, evolve, I think. Yeah.
But 0.6 is very low. That means that we cannot expect that to be the major source of patent applications in the next 5 years, right?
Just a small note. This is referring the 0.6 to the overall patent data. But for 2000, your question was 2016. That was 1.3.
Yeah, and then how can we project from that? When from that figure of 0.6?
Well, all we can say is rising.
Yeah,
you know, from 0.6 to 1.3 in the most recent year, it's rising, and one, you know, might expect it to continue to rise, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're talking about quite a significant volume, 3.2 million patent applications worldwide.
Okay, so I have Nick, then William, then Nina, then John Zaracostas.
I'd like to come back to China, and the Chinese approach. There's a reference here to the role of China in the machine learning techniques of bio-inspired approaches which draw from observations of nature and support vector machines, a form of supervisor. Could you just tell me what that means for the layman's English? Secondly, you point out that there's a very small proportion of international patent applications. They seem to be aiming mainly for domestic market. What is the implication of that? And then you talk also about the fact that a lot of their activity is coming through academic institutions. So what is the implication? What can we conclude about this one?
Well, the first, and you know, I just listened to you, is really, I can't find the reference. You know what the reference is to?
For the power.
What,
Page 15. On the right-hand side. Yeah.
Well, I think it is, I haven't looked at those applications, so I'm giving you, if anyone has, tell me, you know.
This is inspired, these are techniques that are inspired by nature. For instance, the so-called swarm intelligence.
Swarm intelligence.
Swarm intelligence is an example, but not limited to that. And we try to apply this to the problem-solving approaches. And for your information, there is a glossary at the end of the report facility.
Okay. I'll go there.
And?
But then the very limited percentage of international patent applications, they were going for the domestic market, and the role of
okay, so what you see first in the statistics, given that it's a quickly moving field, is domestic applications. You would apply for the international application typically 12 months after. So the normal route adopted by an enterprise would be to file a domestic application, 12 months, within 12 months, they would then file the international application applying to the rest of the world. So it's in a fast-moving field, it's fairly normal that you get the domestic with a higher figure than the international.
4% seems very low.
Of international? Yeah. Yeah. So, look, I think, look, the answer comes back to the point made earlier about, you know, the overall percentage is fairly low. This is a new and fast-moving field. So You know, it's not a technology. It is, of course, in certain respects, it's a technology that has been followed for many, many years, but there's been a quantum leap since about 2013. So we're dealing with with what is happening right now in a very fast-moving field. My intuition would be, and it's only that we're going to see more and more and more of this. And then you had a third one, I think.
Academic institutions.
Sorry?
Academic institutions.
You talk about Baidu in the corporate sector,
yeah.
but a lot of the initiatives seem to be coming from
academic, yeah. So I think this is a reflection of the strategic approach and focus of China. We know that they're the second largest investor in absolute terms in research and development, so they are putting a huge amount of funds. They're investing more in research and development in absolute terms than the European Union. They're putting huge funds into this, and we also know that there is an AI strategy that has been led by the leadership, and in which they wish to become leaders in AI by 2030, and that's all out there. So given that it is a centralised approach to strategy in the economy, we see the logical sequence of investment in research and development and in educational and research institutions, followed by the take-up by state-owned and other enterprises in the economy. Yeah.
Do you have any sense of the absolute numbers of investment? And I'm assuming the US is the biggest.
I don't know whether that's correct, but I'd have to look at that. It's in R&D. We'd have to break that down, and again, you'll find that the categories of applied to the analysis of what is R&D are old categories and evolving. But I don't know the answer to that off the top. We'd have to look at it to see who's investing in R&D, if we've got those, if those figures are available worldwide, and how much. Yeah.
William.
Is this the first ever report on this, on ID and data that you know of?
It's the best.
So you talked about the difference in quality between the national levels, I think, to a degree, at least you referred to it. And I'm wondering, is there, I mean, given the newness of this topic, is there a different degree of variation in the quality? Are there different variation from other classifications?
Yeah.
Are you seeing a difference in the level of granting and rejections of patents that are being filed in other things?
I'd say, William, is that it's too early, because you see what typically might happen with patents, and we saw this in the biotech field very clearly, is that the technology is in front of the patent offices. You know, what happens is the technology is invented, you know, and starts to get applied, and a reorganisation usually has to occur within the patent offices. So we saw in the field of biotech, when it was started to become more fashionable, that there was a shortage of examiners with that particular experience, because they're all wanted by the private sector, and they are very competitive compared to government salaries, and so there's a time lag before the institutional apparatus is able to catch up with what's happening actually at the forefront of the private sector.
They need AI to process the information.
Yes, that's right.
So then, have there been many yet court cases testing these patents?
I don't know of major ones, but you've got some.
We've got some data on litigation on Chapter 6. It shows
it's an emerging field.
Yeah. And the other one on that is just the freedom to operate. Is there any sense of a tipping point at which you're starting to see so many companies rushing to patent everything they can think of on these kinds of areas because it's breaking, that you begin to see some interference with the ability to innovate?
I would say that there you go back to the question of data. You know? Now, why are there internet giants in the US and China? Well, that's obviously a complex question, or it requires a complex analysis. But one of the things that we might notice is that both of those countries have extremely large data pools. So China has, of course, its population of 1.3 billion people. The United States has a population, I think, around about 380 million or 400, plus the hegemony of English, which gives them access to a huge amount of data worldwide. And when you look at Europe, I would say one of the things that you could say about it is that the cultural and linguistic diversity of Europe is not necessarily favouring the formation of major data pools. And we all know that the more data, the better for machine learning, for example, the results that you're going to get. So this, I think, is a question related, more to data. I wouldn't be so concerned about the access question on algorithms. I would be more concerned about the major question interested in the major question out there about data. And we see some positioning that's occurring in relation to data,
I do have a separate question that I can't ask now, but I want to follow up about the process you mentioned of consulting with member states and going forward.
Yeah.
There must be a policy process that's occurring there.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, as you know, the policy is made by member states, and as a secretariat, what all we can do is provoke them into trying to have an international discussion that is going to share some of the findings, concerns, questions that are out there in a field of technology that, many people are saying is going to be a dominant force in the future. So we would like to provoke that conversation without alarming anyone by the notion or the false notion that we're going to be laying down rules, because it's too early in the picture. Yeah.
I have Nina, John, and Jamie.
Okay. So yeah, I think it was sort of touched on what I wanted to ask, but I was wondering on the issue of businesses over universities. If you could talk about that shift there towards businesses and what it says. Are you expecting a move away from the sort of public funding?
Yeah. So look, I think broadly, what we've seen develop over the course of the last 10 to 20 years is that universities have become much more active players in the patent system. Across all fields of technology, we've seen that occur, and that can be, statistically validated. And we have some major players of universities, and we've published stuff on this as well. Now, when you come to the field of AI in particular, well, it's an interesting question. First, I think there's the science and technology dimension, that universities are not, their major activity is not being commercial enterprises, except in as far as education is concerned. They're not out there selling products and services. So they're really into the production and transmission of knowledge. So we might expect them to be more major players ordinarily in scientific publications than in the application of technologies. So that, I think, is another observation that we might make. Nevertheless, Yahoo came out of Stanford, Google came out of Stanford, they came out of universities, these things, but they came out of the universities, so there is a relationship, and in the field of AI, well, I think that, and again we have to deal anecdotally because the world's a big place, but I think there's a fair amount of poaching going on by enterprises in universities for key figures in this area, but it's anecdotal.
John.
Yeah.
1 second.
Can you help us a little bit? You've got so many external contributors. how much is their work? Is that the...
All the data analysis, all the data analysis is ours.
Right. So
And what we've done with the external commentators is get major players to come and give their view of what they think's happening. So
it's represented in a report in green writing, is that correct?
Yes.
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 Got a question. Is there a declaration of potential conflict of interest by all these contributors? Because quite a few are from famous law firms, lobby firms.
Yep. No.
Why not?
Well, you can see where they're from,
I
and
don't know who they represent. What interest?
well, their affiliation is given in each case.
No, who are their clients? I mean, it's only normal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Baidu's client is Baidu. EPFL, its client is EPFL.
About the law firms and the venture capital firms.
Which ones are those? Which ones are those?
Only Baker and McKinsey.
Baker and McKenzie?
Which gave her perspective about the use of the patents.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I had a question if there's any analysis on the potential job creation and job losses. What are the potential net gains or net losses? If you have some input from economists or plural economists.
No, that's not. That's yeah.
There's concern about the use of biometric data for population control.
Yeah. Well,
have you addressed that issue?
No, and this is a huge field, and its applications. I gave you in relation to data a number of different policy dimensions that you can use. And employment you raise is another very important one. And the ILO, of course, has just published its Future of Work report. They're the ones that should be looking at the employment question rather than us. And there, I think, look, just as on a general level, the big question is whether this new technology, and in particular AI, is replacing or displacing employment. And the ILO's talked about this. So is it shifting the locus of employment, or is it replacing employment? And I think that's a huge question, and we're not labour specialists, that's not our field. And your other one on biometric data is question really relating to the use of the technology, and in this instance, privacy and the protection of personal data. Now, as you know, there have been sorties into this field in view of the new technologies that are around, such as the initiative of the European Union for the GDPR, and other countries are looking at this. India has made a number of initiatives in the field of privacy and personal data, but that's not really our focus either. It's an application of the technology and a social concern that is rising in that respect. What we're looking at is the underlying technology.
Jamie.
Thank you. Yeah, Jamie, if you could just to pick up a little bit on what John was saying, with maybe a little bit less complexity. Could you just tell us, because I don't think we're missing the 800-pound gorilla here a little bit. Yeah. What is AI? What is it, by your definition? And you've got all these different categories of neural research and various other things. Those people know, I guess, that they've got smartphones that Siri can respond and whatnot. But what is your definition of it? So that's my first question. And then the other sort of leads into what John was asking. Who encouraged you to issue this report? Why this report? Were there specific countries, specific enterprises, academia, or was it all your own brainchild? And then not to be outdone by my colleague Tom, who had 3 questions. I'll do the same.
And a follow-up.
I'll get there. There was also one metric here about lawsuits, right, which seem to be targeting U.S. companies in particular. I'm just wondering why that is. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Chapter 6. Why that is that it seems like, for example, there are no Chinese companies that I can tell that are in at least the top 10. So why
in
is
the
that?
top 10 what? Litigators?
In the, I'm trying to, I've lost the page with the, it's, but there's a chart that has.
Okay, you find that, and let's start on AI. Well, it's the replication of human intelligence by machines. So all of the techniques that have developed or are developing to replace or imitate human intellectual functions by machine functions. Yeah. So why the report? Yeah, it's our initiative, and it's our initiative because there's obviously a lot of discussion out there amongst government and private circles about the development of AI and the implications of this new technology, relatively new technology, and the upsurge in the use of this new technology. And those questions cover all the dimensions that we've discussed, including, the singularity, whether we're getting ourselves into a position where at some stage the machine intelligence will surpass our own and its autonomy, the so-called technological singularity, and Stephen Hawking, many other, well-known commentators have made observations on this. So as an organisation which has a responsibility for the protection of innovation, and this is one of the most fast-moving fields of innovation, we obviously feel that it would be useful, if not that there is a duty, to put some information out there which can provide some empirical data on what is happening. And that's what we're doing. We're just analysing what the data are telling us and putting that out there. Now, lots of questions arise on top of that, such as the ones that you've been raising, and that's where we need to advance the conversation. But we would like the conversation, whether which is taking place everywhere, to have as much empirical information as its basis as possible. And on the litigation, why the US companies? Well, that's probably a complex question, which is also related to the litigation culture of a country. And as you know, the litigation culture of the US is quite a robust one, let's say. And different cultures have different approaches to this. This is very clear. We've seen that play out in the past 3 or 4 decades with respect to the difference in litigation cultures of Japan and the US, where Japan has, culturally a more conciliatory approach to trying to resolve disputes than going straight to litigation. But the US is not necessarily a negative comment on US culture, but of course the first thing you do is sue someone. Well, I exaggerate a bit, but you see what I mean.
Okay, just going back to equality among news agencies, Nina, AFP, and DPA have asked for follow-ups. And then William, sorry.
A quick question. Do you have to be human to file a patent application, and when do you think we'll have AI filing patent applications for us?
Yeah, well, there has to be a human somewhere, doesn't there? So even if you program a machine to learn how to develop new technologies and to file a patent application, someone has done the initial algorithm and collected and structured the data. So I don't, personally, and it's a personal comment, I don't think the question of authorship is, a lot of people have gone off on the big discussions about authorship. I don't think that's our major policy concern here. But it's obviously a question that's out there. And by the way, I think it will surface much more quickly in the creative industries and in respect of copyright. Because you are having, and you will have questions about AI-generated music, for example. And then, who's the author of this stuff? Who's the creator? And so I think it's more in that area that we'll see it initially than in the inventor area of technology. And there are some really interesting questions there. For example, can I just take the repertoire of music of one company, let's say Sony or any of the other big players in the music field, and feed it into an algorithm to develop AI-based music, or is that an infringement of copyright of Sony? And that's quite a complex question, because copyright is really based on printing technology originally and copying, and so is the algorithm copying all the data in the process to develop the new music? These are the sorts of questions I think we need to start to talk about.
Christian, and then William.
Yeah, just a clarification. Opposed patents means a company is filing a patent and then competitors are opposing?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a normal, and it's normally before the grant, is generalising across the world, that a patent application is published, and there is a period of time in which anyone may file an opposition to the grant of the patent on the basis of that publication. And typically competitors would come in there, but also public interest groups who would say, well, this is not new, or his patent shouldn't be granted on this, or whatever other line they might take.
But we don't know how many of those are actually then being rejected.
How many of the patent applications are rejected on an opposition? We don't have good data for that. We're trying to improve our data collection in this respect, because it's a very important question that goes to quality.
Okay. William and then Peter.
Just to make sure, the report deals with patents, not the copyright question, which is a very, that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, it only deals with...
Just to ask, with the internet, when it rose, I think I remember that part of it, you saw new players emerge that became the dominant. Some of them became the dominant, companies, global companies that in fact are in some cases the ones getting into this. Here we're talking about giants doing the majority of the filing of patents related to this area. Is there any sign of emerging new players in this field, and based on the data that you all have analyzed? And is there a different way of looking at the barriers to entry for small? And is anybody working in their garage on AI? And how do you describe this?
Yeah, look, I'll give you a very general answer, because you've got to look at the data very carefully and in order to answer that properly. But you did say that we see some of the internet giants there. Why? Because of data. Because of the access that they have to data. Amongst other things. I mean, there is also commercial strategy and how they see technologies moving and the services that they're rendering and all that. But, someone in a garage, unless they're doing something illegal, is not going to have, the same access to data,
Sorry, Peter and then John. Okay.
Peter Gurry, I work for South African media, and my question kind of relates to Williams. And I looked at your map on page 84 in terms of global activity, in terms of patent applications and academic research. And there is certainly a bit of a divide in the world.
Yep.
But there is certainly activity in Africa, in Egypt and South Africa. And I was wondering if you could comment on where a country like South Africa or Egypt contribute to the AI conversation that you are attempting to stimulate?
Oh, I'm sure they'll be active players. I'm very sure, because it's when you look at international discussions, I think there are two major axes to those discussions in our area. One of them is competition. so the protection of competitive interests, and another is the disparities in technological capacity and what that means in terms of economic development. So I would say that Egypt and South Africa will be major contributors to the discussion.
Yeah. Yes, Francis, I was wondering if you have some concerns that sort of techno-nationalism could stifle this wave of innovation that we're seeing, and you're on the cutting edge of it. And I think there are some pleas by one of the authors for WIPO to take a position for an agreement on an open access to basic science and technology, basically an intelligent systems commons.
Yeah, so again, look, a couple of comments. As I came in this morning, the driver of the car said, "Il y a trop de barrières," as we were coming into the UN, and I thought, well, that's quite a good metaphor for what's happening in the world, isn't it? There are a lot of barriers being erected around the world that we see. We know that. Okay, so that's playing out. That's something that's happening, and where that's going, of course, is well beyond the scope of this report and well beyond my simple, approach to things. So it's a huge question that's out there of the extent to which closure is occurring in a world that has experienced several decades of opening. So that's a big one beyond me. And your other one, John, was the
global commons.
Global commons. Well, look, again, I would refer you to data. Of course, the algorithms are something, and the technological expertise in that, but they all rely on data. So the questions of access to data, and we know that there are important movements out there and differences. There are open data, open science, open publication, all this is a very strong movement that we see in various communities, not least the scientific community. And on the other hand, there are data pools that are not accessible and not public. And we know that there are business models that rely on taking your data and then telling you what you should buy, or what you should be interested in, or what book you might like, and if you haven't considered this, that. It's all coming from your data. And so I think the question here is the sort of policy structure we're going to evolve, and we are in the process of evolving in relation to data. And there are various initiatives, as I said, there is the privacy side, the GDPR, there's data localization as a question. There are initial positions being formed out there by governments and also by the scientific community.
We have maybe one last question from our new friend from FA, Antonio.
Hi, I'm Antonio Grotto from FA. Looking into the number of applications by country, looks like Europe is kind of left behind. Can you comment on what is the reason for that? You commented before that the diversity of language is a problem for the big data, but is that the main reason, or are there other reasons?
Look, we're in the realm of speculation here, and it's obviously a complex question, and it goes to the amount of investment that is going on. But I would say, that when you're dealing with data pools, language is still important, and the natural data pool of Europe for an enterprise. Now, if you're a German enterprise, your primary focus is going to be on the German market, and you're probably going to be working with German data because that's those are customers. So, I am speculating that this may be one of the explanations for the difference between the United States, China, with their large data, their large internet giants, and the fact that there's not one in Europe. And there have been attempts to, do search engines and this and that, but it's a complex question, I think, and related to, what we see unfolding in terms of strategic competition in technology. Yeah.
Okay, that was the second to last question. Jamie has the last question.
I'm gonna catch in my follow-up from earlier. The just big picture question, maybe.
Yeah.
It seems to me that intellectual property is, at its core, a legal issue. It's a question of having people respect the rights of others when they claim an innovation, right? There has been a lot of, and the rules-based international order, you were talking about barriers earlier, but the rules-based international order, as a lot of people like to talk about, is kind of under assault in its own way right now. And a lot of countries, the United States in particular, has accused China of not abiding by those rules. I'm just wondering, from your viewpoint, your perch at WIPO, can you say that given the figures that China and the participation of China in your system, that they are playing fair and they're trying to play fair by the rules as they are now?
Well, I would say that, that's obviously a question that I can't answer and am not in a position to answer. But what we, as we've discussed, I think, on a number of different occasions, there is no doubt that China has embraced the intellectual property system. It's the largest patent office in the world. It's the largest number of domestic patent applications, and so on in the other areas. You can look at it too. So they are serious players in the field of intellectual property. And all the other indicators would tell us the same thing. President Xi mentions intellectual property and its importance. You may say why, but he does, and not there are not all that many leaders that are giving speeches about intellectual property, frankly, around the world. So this is also there is a strategic focus from the leadership on the importance of intellectual property. Chinese applicants are taking up the notion of intellectual property. The infrastructure on intellectual property in China is extremely significant. In terms of the patent office, in terms of the court system, the specialised courts in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, on intellectual property that they've established. So they're serious players in the field of intellectual property. Now then you have some allegations and accusations that are out there. And I don't think that any of those allegations or applications, unless I'm wrong, are really saying China is not serious about intellectual property. They're focused on what is perceived by another party or other parties to be practices that they do not find acceptable, and they're specific practices. And so that is what we are seeing, and I obviously have no comment to make on that. It's a dispute between major players.
But there have been assertions about quality patents filing.
But
to jump in there, sorry.
That is well. That's a comment on the behaviour of applicants in China, isn't it? And suggesting that. But as I said, we don't have a metric for quality. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And Laurent, is that?
Just a short one as a follow-up. And more broadly, would you say that AI has the potential to fuel another trade war between these two?
You can make big news right now.
Okay, I'll answer it by saying this. I think that what we have seen as a recurrent pattern is that technology gives certain competitive, military and strategic advantages. Now, the extent to which AI is going to do that is something that we can't assess at this stage. but there are important commentators out there who have suggested that it is going to be a game changer. So one would expect that the strategic focus of major geopolitical players will turn to their positioning in relation to AI. And that covers a huge field. It covers everything from the investments they're going to make and how they're going to encourage those investments and the sort of system they have for encouraging those investments, whether market-based or otherwise, through to the way they're going to play it out in their relations with other countries. But the general direction we see, I would say, I would fall on the side of those commentators who are suggesting that this is infiltrating most things, and it's going to be a major economic and military element in determining geopolitical positioning.